Have you ever wondered why some people seem to rise no matter how many times life pushes them down, while others stay stuck in the same place year after year, hoping, wishing, waiting, but never truly moving? Why is it that two people can have the same 24 hours, the same internet, the same opportunities, the same world in front of them, yet one builds power, discipline, influence, and wealth, while the other remains trapped in confusion, distraction, and excuses? What is the invisible difference between those who eventually earn greatly from life and those who spend their entire lives chasing rewards they were never prepared to receive? Because if you look closely enough, if you strip away the noise, the flexing, the social media illusions, and the false shortcuts, you will find one timeless truth beneath it all. The people who earn the most from life are usually the ones who learned the most before the rewards ever arrived. And that is the part nobody wants to hear. People want money before mastery. They want results before discipline. They want the reward before the refinement. They want to be seen before they are built. But the Stoics understood something that modern people keep forgetting. You do not rise to what you desire, you rise to what you have trained for. And if your mind has not been trained, your habits have not been sharpened, your emotions have not been disciplined, and your character has not been strengthened, then even if success comes to you early, you will not be able to keep it. Because what you receive without internal preparation often becomes the very thing that destroys you. So today, we are going deeper than motivation, deeper than hype, deeper than the surface-level advice that tells you to just hustle or just believe in yourself. Today, we are talking about something far more dangerous and far more powerful. The Stoic principle that real earning begins with inner construction. That before money, before influence, before freedom, before status, before the visible reward, there must first be a mind that is capable of carrying weight without collapsing under it. And if you stay with me until the end of this video, you will begin to understand why some people remain average not because they lack potential, but because they never committed themselves to the long and uncomfortable process of becoming valuable first. You will understand why discipline is more profitable than motivation, why patience beats desperation, why skill outlives hype, and why the strongest form of wealth begins in silence, far away from applause. But before we go deeper, if this kind of content speaks to you, if you're serious about building a stronger mind, sharper discipline, emotional control, and a life rooted in timeless wisdom, then consider subscribing to this channel for more content like this. Because this is not just motivation for the moment. This is mental architecture for the long game. And if that's the path you're on, then you're in the right place. Now let's get into it. Most people are trying to earn from a mind that has never been trained to endure. And that is the real tragedy. Because in this generation, everyone is being taught how to want more, but very few are being taught how to become more. You are surrounded by people who are obsessed with outcomes but allergic to process. They want the body but not the discipline. They want the business but not the learning. They want influence but not the self-mastery. They want peace but not the internal order required to sustain it. And because of that, they spend their lives chasing effects without ever addressing causes. The Stoics would call this a form of inner poverty. Not poverty of money, but poverty of mind. A person can have ambition and still be poor in discipline. A person can have dreams and still be bankrupt in patience. A person can speak confidently about success and still be internally weak, emotionally reactive, and mentally unprepared for any serious level of responsibility. And that is why Marcus Aurelius constantly returned to the same internal question. Not what do I want from life, but rather, what kind of person must I become to meet life properly? That is the real question. Because if you are only focused on what you want to receive, you will always live in psychological dependence. You will always be waiting for life to hand you something. You will always be frustrated when reality does not move according to your timeline. You will always feel like something is missing because your attention is fixed on external acquisition rather than internal construction. But the moment your focus shifts from, how can I get more, to, how can I become stronger, wiser, sharper, more disciplined, more valuable, more resilient, everything changes. That is when you stop being a passive consumer of life and start becoming its architect. And this is where the Stoic principle becomes brutally clear. You should never make earning your first obsession. Make becoming your first obsession. Because earning without becoming is unstable. Money amplifies who you already are. Power exposes who you already are. Freedom reveals who you already are. Opportunity tests who you already are. So if you are lazy before success, you may become reckless after success. If you are emotionally weak before success, you may become self-destructive after success. If you are undisciplined before success, you may sabotage what you prayed for the moment it finally arrives. This is why so many people get a breakthrough and still remain broken. Outward increase does not automatically produce inward strength. And Stoicism refuses to let you ignore that. Epictetus taught that no person is free who is not master of themselves. Think about how powerful that really is, because modern people often define freedom in purely external terms. They think freedom means having money, no boss, no pressure, no restrictions, and total flexibility. But Stoicism asks a much more uncomfortable question. What is the value of external freedom if you are still internally ruled by distraction, fear, ego, laziness, impulse, envy, emotional instability, and the desperate need for validation? That is not freedom. That is elegant slavery. And many people are living in it without realizing it. They are not poor because they lack access. They are poor because they lack control. They are not behind because the world forgot them. They are behind because they keep betraying themselves in private. That is the hard truth. The war is not always outside you. Most of the time, the war is within you. It is the war between who you could become and who your comfort is trying to keep you as. It is the war between your long-term purpose and your short-term impulses. It is the war between the disciplined self and the distracted self. It is the war between your future and your excuses. And if you do not learn how to win that war internally, no amount of external opportunity will save you. This is why the phrase "learn first, earn forever" is not just a catchy title. It is a law of transformation. Because learning, in the deepest Stoic sense, is not merely collecting information. It is becoming fit for reality. It is learning how to think clearly when emotions are loud. It is learning how to stay steady when life is uncertain. It is learning how to remain focused when distractions are everywhere. It is learning how to keep moving when comfort is calling your name. It is learning how to build yourself in obscurity while everyone else is trying to be noticed before they are ready. That is what makes a person dangerous in the best possible way. Not noise, not performance, not fake confidence, not temporary excitement, but internal solidity. A person who can sit with discomfort and not run. A person who can delay gratification and not panic. A person who can study when others are scrolling. A person who can remain disciplined when no one is watching. A person who can suffer intelligently instead of emotionally collapsing every time life becomes inconvenient. That kind of person eventually becomes hard to stop. Because while others are chasing visible rewards, they are building invisible infrastructure. And invisible infrastructure is what holds visible success together. This is where most people sabotage their own future. They underestimate the season of preparation because it doesn't look impressive. They think if no one sees them, then nothing meaningful is happening. They think if money has not arrived yet, then the work has no value. They think if growth is slow, then they must be failing. But the Stoics would tell you something modern culture rarely honors. The deepest transformations are often invisible while they are happening. A seed does not look powerful when buried. Iron does not look elegant while it is being forged. A disciplined mind does not look glamorous while it is being built. But those who understand process do not panic in private seasons. They know that silence is not emptiness. They know that obscurity is not irrelevance. They know that slow growth is still growth. They know that every repetition, every sacrifice, every moment of resisted temptation, every hour of study, every disciplined morning, every uncomfortable decision is shaping a future version of themselves that will eventually carry more weight than the current version ever could. And that is what average people do not understand. They want the fruit, but they despise the roots. But roots are everything. Your habits are roots. Your routines are roots. Your standards are roots. Your focus is roots. Your private discipline is roots. Your ability to keep promises to yourself is roots. And when the storms of life come, because they will, it is not your dreams that hold you steady. It is your roots. That is why Stoicism is not merely a philosophy of thought. It is a philosophy of training. It trains perception. It trains judgment. It trains response. It trains endurance. It trains restraint. It trains inner command. And once you begin to live this way, you stop seeing your current struggle as punishment and start seeing it as preparation. That changes everything. Because the moment struggle becomes meaningful, suffering loses some of its power over you. Now you are not just going through hard times. Now you are being shaped. Now you are being sharpened. Now you are being tested for capacity. Now you are being trained for a level of responsibility that your old self could not have carried. And that is why many people misread their own lives. They think delay means denial. They think difficulty means they are not meant for more. They think pressure means life is against them. But often, pressure is proof that life is trying to build something stronger inside you. The Stoics understood that adversity is not always an interruption to the path. Sometimes adversity is the path. And if you can understand that, truly understand it, then you stop asking, "Why is this hard?" and start asking, "What is this trying to build in me?" That is the mindset of someone who will eventually earn forever. Not because life becomes easy, but because they become deeper, and depth always outlasts hype. The Stoic trap of comfort, distraction, and easy pleasure. Most people do not fail because they are incapable. They fail because they are too comfortable with remaining unfinished. And that is one of the most dangerous forms of self-destruction because it does not feel like destruction in the moment. Feels normal, feels harmless. It feels like just one more day. Just one more day of procrastination. Just one more day of avoidance. Just one more day of saying you will start tomorrow. Just one more day of feeding distractions, scrolling past your own potential, escaping into comfort, entertaining yourself while your future quietly starves in the background. This is how average is built. Not through one catastrophic mistake, but through thousands of tolerated moments of weakness that slowly become identity. And Stoicism is ruthless when it comes to this truth because the Stoics did not believe that a person becomes strong by accident. They believed strength is the result of repeated inner victories, often small, often unseen, often uncomfortable, but always transformative. In other words, the life you eventually earn is usually the consequence of what you repeatedly allow, repeatedly resist, and repeatedly reinforce. That means your future is being shaped even on the days that seem insignificant, especially on those days, because average people think transformation happens in dramatic moments. But disciplined people understand that transformation is usually hidden inside ordinary decisions. The decision to wake up when you said you would. The decision to study when your mind wants stimulation instead. The decision to keep your word when nobody would know if you broke it. The decision to sit with boredom instead of running back to instant pleasure. The decision to delay the small reward so you can build the larger life. That is where the real battle is. And if you lose enough of those battles, your life begins to reflect it. This is why so many people feel stuck without understanding why. On the surface, they look like they are trying. They talk about goals. They consume self-improvement content. They say they want discipline, wealth, peace, freedom, impact. But beneath the language, beneath the intentions, beneath the motivational mood swings, their daily behavior is still serving comfort more than construction. And comfort, when left unchallenged, becomes a prison with soft walls. That is why it is so dangerous, because hard prisons at least announce themselves. Comfort does not. Comfort whispers. Comfort negotiates. Comfort delays. Comfort tells you that you deserve a break before you have even earned momentum. Comfort tells you that consistency can wait. Comfort tells you that your current habits are not that bad. Comfort tells you that your potential is safe just because it still exists in theory. But potential that is never disciplined eventually becomes regret. And regret is far heavier than effort. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that the human mind naturally drifts toward ease, indulgence, and avoidance unless it is consciously trained otherwise. That is why Stoicism was never about simply thinking positively. It was about governing the self. It was about building an internal ruler strong enough to command the weaker impulses that would otherwise sabotage a meaningful life. Because if you do not rule your mind, your impulses will. And impulses make terrible leaders. Impulses chase what is easy. Impulses worship what is immediate. Impulses sacrifice the future for the comfort of now. Impulses are loud, emotional, impatient, and short-sighted. This is why a person can know exactly what they should do and still fail to do it. Knowledge without command is useless. You can know that discipline matters and still live undisciplined. You can know that distractions are killing your focus and still keep feeding them. You can know that your habits are beneath your potential and still remain loyal to them. Why? Because the issue is not always ignorance. Often, the issue is weakness of command. And Stoicism exists to solve exactly that. It teaches you that your mind must become a place of order before your life can become a place of progress. It teaches you that self-respect is not built through wishful thinking, but through behavioral integrity. It teaches you that confidence is not something you say. It is something you earn by repeatedly proving to yourself that your higher mind can lead your lower urges. That is where real self-belief comes from. Not from affirmations alone. Not from external praise. Not from looking successful. Not from being seen, but from evidence. The evidence that you can endure discomfort without folding. The evidence that you can stay focused without constant stimulation. The evidence that you can honor long-term goals over short-term pleasure. The evidence that when life asks for discipline, you do not disappear. That kind of evidence changes a person, because it creates internal trust. And internal trust is priceless. A person who cannot trust themselves will always feel fractured inside. They will make plans they do not follow, set standards they do not honor, and create visions they secretly do not believe in because their actions keep contradicting their intentions. Over time, this creates a silent form of psychological damage. They may still speak about ambition, but beneath the surface, they are carrying the accumulated weight of broken promises to themselves. And that is exhausting. It is exhausting to want more while repeatedly betraying the path that leads to more. This is why so many people are not simply tired from work. They are tired from internal contradiction. They are tired because part of them wants greatness, while another part keeps feeding mediocrity. They are tired because they are divided against themselves. They are tired because they are trying to build a future with habits that are loyal to comfort. They are tired because their vision and their discipline are no longer speaking the same language. And Stoicism does not comfort that division, confronts it. It says, in essence, stop negotiating with the weaker version of yourself. That is where your life begins to change. The moment you stop treating your impulses like equals and start treating them like things to be governed, your inner world begins to reorganize. You stop asking your emotions for permission to act. You stop waiting to feel ready. You stop requiring perfect motivation before beginning. You stop making mood the manager of your destiny. And that is powerful because most people are not controlled by reality. They are controlled by their reactions to reality. A hard day ruins them. A small setback derails them. A little discomfort sends them backward. A temporary emotion becomes a permanent excuse. But the Stoic mind trains differently. It says, my feelings are real, but they are not in charge. It says, this is difficult, but difficulty is not disqualification. It says, I may not control what happens, but I control how I meet it. It says, my discomfort does not decide my future, my discipline does. That is a completely different way to live. And it is the difference between someone who remains average and someone who eventually becomes unshakable. Because average people obey the mood. Strong people obey the standard. And that is why standards matter so much. Standards are not just rules. Standards are identity boundaries. They are the line between the person you are trying to become and the version of you that keeps trying to drag you backward. When you raise your standards, you stop normalizing what is weakening you. You stop romanticizing laziness. You stop excusing inconsistency. You stop calling self-sabotage just being human. You stop lowering the bar every time discipline becomes inconvenient. Instead, you begin to live with a quiet seriousness. Not because you have become cold. not because you have become rigid, but because you finally understand that your life is too valuable to keep handing it over to distraction. And distraction is one of the great diseases of this age. Not because entertainment itself is evil, but because most people no longer know how to protect their attention. Their mind is scattered across 100 trivial things. They are overstimulated, underdisciplined, emotionally reactive, and mentally fragmented. Their focus is constantly being rented out to algorithms, trends, noise, gossip, comparison, and endless digital consumption. And then they wonder why they feel weak. But attention is power. Where your attention goes, your life follows. If your attention is always leaking, your potential will always feel distant. If your attention is undirected, your energy will remain diluted. If your attention is enslaved to novelty, your discipline will never mature. This is why one of the most stoic things you can do in the modern world is to protect your mind from unnecessary noise. That means not everything deserves your reaction. Not everything deserves your opinion. Not everything deserves your emotional energy. Not everything deserves your time. The wise person becomes selective. Selective about inputs. Selective about environments. Selective about friendships. Selective about information. Selective about habits. Selective about what enters the inner world. Because once you understand that your mind is the engine of your future, you stop treating it casually. You stop polluting it with chaos and then expecting clarity. That is what many people are doing without realizing it. They flood their mind with confusion, stimulation, gossip, envy, and emotional garbage, and then they wonder why they cannot think deeply, act clearly, or stay consistent. But clarity is not random. Clarity is cultivated. It is protected. It is earned through inner cleanliness. And that means if you want a different life, you may first need a different mental diet. Different conversations, different content, different routines, different standards, different uses of your mornings, different responses to discomfort, different relationship with boredom. Because boredom, ironically, is where many people lose. They cannot sit still. They cannot remain with themselves. They cannot endure the silence required for concentration, reflection, and skill building. They need constant stimulation to feel alive. And that is dangerous, because if your nervous system becomes addicted to stimulation, discipline will begin to feel like punishment. And once discipline feels like punishment, you will unconsciously avoid the very activities that could transform your life. That is why Stoicism calls you back to simplicity, back to stillness, back to intentionality, back to voluntary restraint, back to the ancient strength of being able to sit in a room with your thoughts and not need to escape. That is power, because the person who can remain with themselves can also build themselves. And building yourself is often quiet, repetitive, and unglamorous. It is not always cinematic. It is not always emotionally rewarding. It is not always externally validated. But it is sacred, because in those invisible moments, the early mornings, the focused study sessions, the disciplined refusals, the resisted temptations, the private repetitions, you are slowly separating yourself from the average life that most people unconsciously accept. You are proving that your future matters more than your comfort. You are proving that your mind can be trained. You are proving that your standards are not temporary moods. You are proving that you are no longer available for a lesser version of yourself. And once that shift happens, something remarkable begins to form inside you. You become less fragile. You become less easily seduced. You become less easily distracted. You become less emotionally manipulated by temporary desires. You become less dependent on external motivation. You start becoming internally anchored. And that is where earning truly begins. Not at the bank. Not on the platform. Not in the applause. Not in the visible reward. But in the mind that has learned how not to waste itself. Because the person who learns how to protect their energy, govern their habits, and command their attention has already escaped one of the greatest traps of average living. They are no longer drifting. They are directing. And once a person begins directing themselves with consistency, it is only a matter of time before life begins to respond differently to them. Now the next truth is even deeper, because once you escape the trap of comfort, you face the next great test. Can you delay what feels good now for what will matter later? That is where most people collapse. Because the road to lasting success is not built on talent alone. It is built on your ability to suffer intelligently in the short term so you can live powerfully in the long term. And that is exactly where we go next. If you want, I can continue right now with the Stoic discipline of delayed reward. This is where the script gets much deeper and more powerful. Why most people lose their future for what feels good right now. One of the greatest differences between a strong mind and a weak one is this. A weak mind is always asking, what do I feel like doing right now? But a strong mind asks, what will this choice cost me later? That single shift in thinking changes everything. Because most people are not ruining their lives through dramatic disasters. They are ruining them through small daily trades, quiet trades, invisible trades, trades that feel harmless in the moment but become expensive over time. Every day, people are unconsciously exchanging long-term peace for short-term pleasure. They are trading discipline for comfort, focus for entertainment, skill for distraction, future wealth for present indulgence, inner power for immediate emotional relief. And because the consequences do not always show up instantly, they keep doing it. That is how self-destruction hides. It does not always arrive looking dangerous. Sometimes it arrives looking enjoyable. That is what makes it so deceptive. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that human beings are often seduced not by what is evil in an obvious sense, but by what is pleasant in an undisciplined sense. The thing that weakens you is not always what hurts immediately. Sometimes it is what comforts you too easily. Sometimes it is the habit that slowly erodes your edge. Sometimes it is the routine that numbs your ambition. Sometimes it is the pleasure that asks for nothing from you except your future. And if you are not careful, you will slowly build a life around avoiding discomfort, and then wonder why your life never becomes powerful. This is where delayed reward becomes everything. Because no meaningful life is built without sacrifice. Not a strong body, not a disciplined mind, not a respected character, not a valuable skill, not a peaceful inner world, not a life of substance. All of it requires the same brutal principle. You must be willing to give up what is easy now in order to become capable later. That is the trade. And most people never fully accept it. They want extraordinary results with ordinary sacrifice. They want uncommon outcomes with common discipline. They want to live above average while remaining loyal to average appetites. But reality does not work like that. The future does not reward wishes. It rewards preparation. That is why Stoicism is so powerful. It strips away fantasy and forces you to confront the mechanics of becoming. It teaches you that every meaningful life is built through conscious denial. Not denial in a bitter sense, but denial in a strategic sense. The ability to say no to what weakens you so you can say yes to what expands you. The ability to reject temporary comfort for permanent capacity. And that is one of the hardest skills a person can ever learn. Because in the beginning, delayed reward feels unfair. It feels like you are doing all the right things while seeing none of the visible results. It feels like you are sacrificing while others are indulging. It feels like you are being disciplined while others are being entertained. It feels like you are carrying weight in silence while the world celebrates people who appear to be winning faster than you. And this is where weak people give up. Not because the path is wrong, but because the reward is not immediate enough for their emotions. That is why emotional maturity matters so much. Because if your discipline depends on visible reward, then your discipline is still immature. Real discipline must survive invisibility. It must survive slow seasons. It must survive boredom. It must survive repetition. It must survive uncertainty. It must survive the painful period where your effort is real but your external results are still catching up. That is where Stoic endurance becomes priceless. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself not to become resentful toward the nature of effort. He understood that growth is not always emotionally satisfying in the moment. In fact, much of what eventually strengthens you will first feel like friction. And if you misinterpret friction as failure, you will abandon the very process that was trying to elevate you. That is what many people do. They confuse resistance with misalignment. They confuse slowness with uselessness. They confuse difficulty with impossibility. But some things are difficult not because they are wrong. They are difficult because they are asking more of you than your current self is used to giving. That is a very different thing. And once you understand that, you stop seeing delayed reward as punishment. You start seeing it as evidence that you are finally engaging in something real. Because real things take time. Real character takes time. Real skill takes time. Real credibility takes time. Real trust takes time. Real confidence takes time. Real freedom takes time. Only illusions are instant, and modern life is full of illusions. Instant fame, instant money, instant success, instant transformation, instant status, instant validation. But the Stoics would ask you a far more important question. If something arrives too quickly for your character to carry, will it really serve you, or will it expose you? That question should humble anyone who is serious about becoming more. Because there are many things people are begging for that they are not yet built to handle. They want visibility, but they cannot yet govern ego. They want wealth, but they cannot yet govern appetite. They want freedom, but they cannot yet govern time. They want influence, but they cannot yet govern emotion. They want success, but they cannot yet govern themselves. And that is why life often withholds externally what you have not yet stabilized internally. Not always as cruelty, sometimes as mercy, because what arrives before you are ready can easily become what breaks you. This is why learning must come first. Not because money is bad, not because success is wrong, not because ambition is dangerous, but because anything powerful placed in weak hands becomes unstable. So before you ask life for more, ask yourself, can I carry more? Can I sustain more? Can I stay grounded under more pressure? Can I remain disciplined with more access? Can I remain wise with more opportunity? Can I remain calm with more responsibility? Those are Stoic questions. And most people never ask them because they are too focused on acquisition. But acquisition without structure creates collapse. That is why the strongest people often look slow in the beginning. They are not behind. They are building foundations. And foundations are boring to people who only understand appearances. A foundation does not look impressive. It is underground. It is hidden. It is repetitive. It is uncelebrated. But when storms come, nobody asks how beautiful the paint was. They ask whether the structure can stand. That is your life. That is your mind. That is your future. And if you are wise, you will stop obsessing over visible speed and start obsessing over structural strength. Because the person who builds slowly but solidly will often outlast the person who rises quickly but hollowly. That is one of the deepest Stoic truths of all. Endurance is more important than excitement. Anyone can feel inspired for a day. Anyone can chase intensity for a week. Anyone can speak boldly when they are emotionally charged. But can you remain loyal to the process when the emotional high disappears? That is the test. Can you still study when no one is praising you? Can you still build when the results are invisible? Can you still wake up disciplined when life feels repetitive? Can you still choose the hard thing when nobody would blame you for choosing the easy thing? That is where your future is decided. Not in your dramatic declarations, but in your quiet loyalties. The things you keep doing. The things you keep refusing, the things you keep honoring, the things you keep protecting. This is why delayed reward is not merely a productivity skill. It is a character skill. It reveals whether you are governed by principle or by appetite. And appetite is one of the most expensive rulers a person can serve. Because appetite is never satisfied. It always wants more comfort, more escape, more indulgence, more ease, more novelty, more stimulation, more excuses disguised as balance. But Stoicism teaches moderation not because pleasure is evil, but because undisciplined pleasure makes the soul soft. And a soft soul cannot carry a hard life. That line matters, because many people are trying to build a strong future with a soft inner life. They avoid challenge. They resist boredom. They flee inconvenience. They collapse under pressure. They need everything to feel good before they can stay committed. And then they wonder why their goals remain distant. But the problem is not always their dream. The problem is often their threshold. They have not yet trained themselves to withstand enough discomfort to become dangerous. That is why the Stoics practiced voluntary hardship. Not because suffering itself was holy, but because choosing small discomforts on purpose makes you harder to control by fear, comfort, and external conditions. That is power. To wake up early when you do not feel like it. To study deeply when your mind wants stimulation. To stay off distractions when your impulses are restless. To keep your standards when shortcuts are available. To continue your discipline when no reward is visible yet. Those things seem small, but repeated over time, they create an extraordinary kind of person. A person who cannot be bribed by comfort. A person who cannot be easily seduced away from purpose. A person who no longer panics in the presence of delay. A person who understands that temporary deprivation often creates permanent strength. That is the person who eventually earns forever, because they are no longer trying to feel successful. They are becoming capable, and capability is one of the most underrated forms of wealth in the world. A capable mind can rebuild after failure. A capable person can survive uncertainty. A capable worker can create value anywhere. A capable leader can remain calm under pressure. A capable thinker can adapt without collapsing. A capable soul does not need perfect conditions to make progress. That is true power. Not luck, not hype, not image. Capability. And capability is built through repetition under resistance. Which means every time you delay a weaker impulse in favor of a stronger future, you are not just being disciplined, you are literally becoming someone else. You are becoming less ordinary, less impulsive, less fragile, less dependent on immediate emotional reward, and more solid, more deliberate, more trustworthy, more internally free. That is why the delayed reward season is sacred. It may not look glamorous. It may not feel exciting. It may not impress people who only respect visible outcomes. But if you survive that season with integrity, it will give you something far more valuable than applause. It will give you depth. And depth changes everything. Because once you become deep, you stop needing constant proof that your life is moving. You stop panicking every time the timeline feels slow. You stop envying people whose results came quickly but whose structure is still weak. You stop chasing urgency just because the world is impatient. Instead, you become rooted. And rooted people are dangerous in the best way, because they are hard to shake, hard to distract, hard to discourage, hard to manipulate. They know who they are becoming, and they are willing to wait for it. That is Stoic strength. And that is why learning comes first. Because learning is not just about information. It is about training your nervous system, your character, your habits, your identity, and your responses to become worthy of what you are asking life to release. That is what most people skip. They want the release without the readiness. But if you are building an unbreakable mind, you cannot afford that mistake. You must become patient enough to let yourself be built properly. Even if it takes longer. Even if nobody sees it. Even if the process is humbling. Even if the reward is delayed. Because when it finally arrives, you will not just have it. You will be able to hold it. And that changes everything. So the real question is no longer just why most people stay average. The real question now becomes, how do you actually begin? How do you go from being distracted to disciplined? How do you go from wanting success to becoming valuable enough to create it? How do you stop consuming inspiration and start building actual skill? How do you train your mind to learn in a way that eventually becomes income, leverage, freedom, and power? Because this is where many people get emotionally fired up and then do absolutely nothing different. They hear powerful truths. They feel temporarily motivated. They promise themselves change. But when the video ends, they go right back to the same habits, the same routines, the same distractions, the same untrained mind, and the same invisible patterns that have kept them stuck for years. And Stoicism would call that one of the most dangerous forms of self-deception, admiring wisdom without applying it. Because wisdom that is not practiced becomes entertainment. And if all this becomes is entertainment for you, then nothing changes. Your life does not improve because you heard something powerful. Your life improves because you begin to embody what is powerful. That is the difference. So now we leave theory. Now we enter the territory that separates dreamers from builders. Because if you truly want to learn first and earn forever, then you need more than motivation. You need a system. You need mental architecture. You need a way of learning that transforms you into someone who is valuable, focused, skilled, and difficult to ignore. And this is where everything changes. Because earning is not where the process starts. Learning is, but not random learning, not scattered learning, not passive learning, not watching a few videos and calling it growth. I'm talking about strategic learning, the kind of learning that sharpens your mind, strengthens your discipline, builds your identity, and turns you into someone who can eventually create real value in the world. So the next question becomes, how do you actually build learning skills that can one day become income? The answer is deeper than most people realize. Because to build earning power, you must first build learning power. And learning power is not just intelligence. It is your ability to focus deeply, stay consistent, absorb useful knowledge, practice it long enough to become dangerous with it, and keep improving even when no reward is immediate. That is the real path. And if you can master this, you can change your life. How to start building learning skills to earn. The Stoic blueprint for becoming valuable. The first thing you must understand is this. You do not get paid for effort alone. You get paid for solving problems. That changes everything. Because many people are working hard, but they are not becoming valuable. They are busy but not useful. They are trying but not sharpening. They are consuming but not transforming. And that is why their effort does not translate into income. The world rarely rewards motion by itself. It rewards relevance. It rewards competence. It rewards clarity. It rewards people who can do something useful, difficult, or meaningful at a high level. So if you want to earn more, your first obsession should not be money. It should be, what problem can I learn to solve? That is the question that begins to separate the average mind from the builder's mind. Because once you begin thinking like that, your entire relationship with learning changes. You stop learning just to feel productive. You stop learning just to impress people. You stop learning just to say you are working on yourself. Instead, you begin learning with precision. Now you are not just collecting information. You are building economic power. And stoically, this matters because it shifts your attention from fantasy to function. Marcus Aurelius was not interested in empty self-image. He was interested in utility, in becoming someone who can meet life properly, someone who can carry responsibility, someone who can contribute, someone who can endure, someone who can operate with intelligence, restraint, and effectiveness. That is the same mentality you must bring to learning. You must stop asking, what sounds exciting? And start asking, what skill, if I truly master it, could make me useful in the modern world? That question alone can save years of wasted time. Because many people are not poor in potential. They are poor in direction. And direction is everything. If your energy has no direction, your effort gets scattered. If your learning has no target, your growth becomes random. If your curiosity is undisciplined, you become a collector of fragments instead of a builder of mastery. That is why the first practical step is not to learn everything. It is to choose one lane of value. One lane, not 10. Not 7 side hustles. Not 20 random skills. Not a chaotic identity built on temporary excitement. One lane, because scattered attention creates weak progress. But focused repetition creates power. And this is where most people resist. Because choosing one lane feels limiting. But in reality, clarity is liberation. When you know what you are building, your days become cleaner. Your choices become sharper. Your time becomes more intentional. Your mind becomes less noisy. And once your mind becomes less noisy, learning becomes much more effective. So what should that one lane be? It should be a skill that sits at the intersection of 3 things. Something useful. Something the world actually values. something learnable, something you can improve through practice, something sustainable, something you can stay with long enough to become excellent. That is the formula. Because if a skill is useful but you hate the process, you will quit. If it is enjoyable but has no practical value, it may never become income. If it is valuable but you approach it inconsistently, it will never mature into mastery. So your job is to find the lane where usefulness, commitment, and long-term repetition can meet. That is where your future begins to take shape. And once you choose that lane, the Stoic principle becomes simple. Do not chase results yet. Chase competence. That is one of the most important lines in this entire script. Because the average person starts learning and immediately asks, how long until I make money? How long until I blow up? How long until I become successful? How long until people notice? Wrong focus. That mindset poisons the process before it even begins. Because when your attention is fixed too early on reward, you become emotionally unstable. You start rushing. You start comparing. You start doubting. You start feeling like you are behind. You start resenting the repetition required to become great. And once that happens, you stop learning deeply. You become outcome addicted instead of mastery driven. But the Stoic builder learns differently. They understand that the early stage is not for applause. It is for construction. So instead of asking, how fast can I earn from this? Ask, how dangerous can I become at this skill if I stay consistent for the next 6 to 12 months? That is a better question, because now your focus is on becoming rare, and rarity creates value. The world does not pay average skill at a high level. It pays refined skill, pays disciplined execution, it pays reliability. It pays people who can produce results consistently. That means if you want to earn, you must become the kind of person whose skill is trusted. And trust is built through repetition. This is where the second principle begins. 1. Build a learning identity before you build an income identity. Most people say they want money, but they do not yet have the identity required to create it. Because money is often a side effect of a deeper thing, a disciplined identity, competent identity, a focused identity, a reliable identity, a builder's identity. That identity must come first. And this is deeply Stoic because Stoicism always starts with the self. Not the market, not the applause, not the external reward. The self. Who are you when no one is watching? How do you spend your private hours? How do you behave when there is no immediate benefit? Can you remain committed when there is no recognition? Can you continue learning when the process feels slow and invisible? That is where your future is actually decided. So before you tell yourself, I want to make money from this, first tell yourself, I am becoming the kind of person who learns deeply, practices daily, and finishes what they start. That identity is powerful, because once identity changes, behavior becomes easier to stabilize. If you still see yourself as someone who is inconsistent, distracted, lazy, or trying to get serious, then your actions will keep reflecting that old internal story. But when your identity becomes, I am a disciplined learner, I am someone who sharpens my mind daily, I am someone who builds value even when no one sees it, I am someone who trains, practices, and improves. Now your behavior begins to align, and that is not fake confidence. That is deliberate self-construction. That is Stoic self-rule. Learn in layers, not in chaos. This is where most people completely waste their potential. They learn chaotically, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. One video today, a random tutorial tomorrow, a different topic next week. No structure, no sequence, no repetition, no system. That is not learning. That is intellectual wandering. And wandering rarely produces mastery. If you want to build a skill that can one day earn for you, you must learn in layers. That means you break the skill into stages. Layer 1, foundations. What are the core basics? Layer 2, repetition. How do I practice the basics until they become natural? Layer 3, application. How do I use this skill in real situations? Layer 4, refinement. How do I improve quality, speed, and precision? Layer 5, output. How do I turn the skill into visible work, proof, or service? That is how real learning happens. And this is where the Stoic mindset gives you a massive advantage. Because Stoicism trains patience. And patience is a superpower in skill building. Most people want to skip layers because being a beginner hurts the ego. They want to look advanced before they have earned depth. They want shortcuts because fundamentals feel too slow. But fundamentals are everything. Without fundamentals, your progress becomes fragile. Without fundamentals, pressure exposes you. Without fundamentals, your confidence becomes fake. Without fundamentals, you may appear to improve, but your foundation remains weak. That is why the disciplined learner becomes humble enough to repeat simple things until they become powerful. And humility is a hidden advantage, because arrogance resists correction, but humility accelerates mastery. Replace passive learning with active learning. This may be one of the biggest mistakes in modern self-improvement. People think because they are watching content, they are growing. But watching is not the same as building. Listening is not the same as practicing. Being inspired is not the same as becoming skilled. That is why most people feel like they are always learning, but still remain in the same place financially, mentally, and practically, because they are consuming without converting. And this is where you must become ruthless. Every time you learn something, ask, can I explain this clearly? Can I apply this practically? Can I use this without looking back at the tutorial? Can I produce something with it? If the answer is no, then you have not learned it deeply yet. This is where active learning begins. Active learning means writing notes in your own words, practicing immediately, repeating until memory becomes skill, testing yourself without help, creating output from what you learned. That is what builds earning power, because the world does not pay you for what you watched, pays you for what you can do. That line alone should stay with your audience, because it destroys the illusion of fake progress. And once you understand that, your entire life can shift. Now every day becomes a workshop. Now your mind becomes a training ground. Now your hours become investments. Now your repetition becomes identity. Now your private learning begins to shape public value. And once that starts happening, income is no longer some distant fantasy. It becomes a logical consequence of who you are becoming. What you earn in life will always be limited by what you are willing to become, and that is why the real mission is not to chase money but to build a mind, a discipline, and a skill set that can create value again and again no matter what life takes from you. Learn deeply, practice daily, stay patient, and let your growth become your power. If this message spoke to you, then subscribe to this channel for more timeless wisdom on discipline, mindset, stoicism, and self-mastery. And before you go, comment below, what skill are you committed to mastering next?